A good and Erev Shabbos from Yerushalayim, here Kodesh, Tzibona B'Meher B'Yameinu. What a schus to spend a few days in Yerushalayim, the celebration of my son's engagement yesterday, and learning Pesachim. This is all about the Korban Pesach, which had to be brought in Yerushalayim, especially in the Azara and the old city Yerushalayim, the walled city Yerushalayim. It's a tremendous chus to be here. And it's my first Shabbos in Yerushalayim in 26 years. Hashem, what a chus. Okay, let's jump into it. Today's shir is Lila Nishmas Michal Yosef ben Nachum Davin, our Nachum ben Simcha Cohen, Yeshua Mordechai ben Shepsel, Bracha Sarah Bash Shmuel You know, Moshe ben Yosef, may the Neshamas will have an aliyah. Refuah Shlema Adasar Basleach Ana Pesel Basyenta Yisrael ben Rachel Leah Rachel Bas Pesel Zada Avram Yitzchak ben Risha Chai Bas Dova Bela Refuah Shlema Soch Ar Chali Chali Yisrael. Okay, here we go. Perek Zion. Wow, it's only been a week. Perek Zion Mishnah Aleph. Now we're going to talk about roasting the current Pesach. First we spoke about, first 2 days we talked about the Pesach, and we talked about a whole bunch of different things. Now we're going to talk about actually how do you roast it. We talked about what happens every Pesach following Shabbos. We talked about the different components and everything. Now we went into actual technicalities of roasting the current Pesach. The pasuk said, okay, Kate Mishnah Aleph. Kate said, "Solin as a Pesach." How do we roast the Pesach offering? How do we roast the current Pesach? Maybe in shapud shell rimon. You bring a spit made out of pomegranate wood, which does not give off any moisture. Toch v'mitoch piv ad base nikuvaso, and push it completely through the body of the animal, from its mouth to the opening in its back. He then puts its legs and intestines, which were removed from the animal after it was slaughtered, inside the cavity of its body so that they'll be roasted along with the animal. Different Rabbi Yossi, Haglili, this is according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rabbi Akiva says, Kamin Bishul Huseh. This is also like cooking. If the legs and intestines are placed inside the animal, it appears as though they are being cooked inside a pot and not roasted directly over the fire. Ella, Tolin Chutzulo, rather we hang the legs and intestines directly on the spit outside the animal so that they face the fire. Mishnah Beis. Ein Solin as a Pesach, lo ala shpud, lo al ha'askala. We may not roast the Pesach on a metal spit or on a metal grill, because the meat will be roasted by the heat of the metal and not directly by the fire. I'm a Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok said, Ma'aseh Rabbi Gamliel Shamar leTevi Avdo. What's happened that Rabbi Gamliel said to Tevi, his slave? It's the famous Tavi that we spoke about in Brachos. It's the Tevi that Gamliel would sit Shiva on because he was a kosher, and you know a few things about his slave Tavi. So you say to a slave, say lanu es Pesach al ha'askala. Go out and roast a Pesach for us on a grill that has large gaps between its rods. The spit with the Pesach was suspended inside an earthenware oven, and a fire was kindled beneath it on the oven floor. So now we're going to talk about some halachos regarding that. Naga b'charshel shel tanur. If the meat touched the hot earthenware wall of the oven, yiklaf es makomo. You must peel off the place on the meat that touched the oven, because the meat that was roasted by the heat of the earthenware and not directly by the fire. Okay, it has to be roasted by the current Pesach has to be roasted by the fire, not just secondary heat. Nata me turbo al hacheres v'chazrulav. Some juice from the Korban Pesach dripped onto the hot earthenware and then splattered back and was absorbed by the meat. It is not enough to peel that spot. Rather, Yitolas Bekomo, he must remove from the meat the place that absorbed the juice, since the juice that touched the earthenware, since that juice touched the earthenware and became cooked by its heat, it may not be eaten, since it was then reabsorbed by the meat. The meat may not be eaten. Therefore, he must remove the whole section of meat in which it was absorbed. Not meratabo al hasolis. If juice from the Korban Pesach dripped onto hot flour that was in the oven, yikmotes mikomo. He must remove a handful of flour from the place that the juice touched. The juice was cooked by the heat of the flour and may not be eaten. Consequently, the flour which the juice is absorbed also becomes forbidden and must be removed. Mishnah Gimel, Sachu b'shem and Truma. The person smears a Korban Pesach with oil that is Truma. Im chaburas kohanim yochlu. Then if a group of kohanim is registered for that Pesach, they may eat it, since kohanim may eat Truma. If it was a group of Yisraelim who may not eat Truma, then the law is as follows: Im chai hu yidichenu. If the Korban Pesach is still raw, he should rinse it off. Raw meat does not absorb oil, and rinsing the meat will remove the oil on its surface. However, if you smear the oil on the meat after it's already roasted, he should peel off the outer layer of meat, because roasted meat is absorbent, and the outer layer of meat absorbs the oil. If you smeared it with oil that is mashasheni, he may not charge the value of the oil to the people in the group. Because we may not redeem mashasheni in Yerushalayim. Mashasheni has to be redeemed outside Yerushalayim and then brought into Yerushalayim. Cannot redeem it once it's already there. Okay, the next 6 Mishnahs of this Perek, Mishnayos Dalet through Yud, discuss Tumah as relates to the Korban Pesach. We know that you're not allowed to bring any korbanos or eat any korbanos with people if people are tummy. So a tummy person cannot bring a korban and cannot eat a korban. However, the exception is Korban Pesach. When rove kohanim, rove of the people are tummy from tumas meis, then the Korban Pesach can be makruv. And the same thing is with Korban Tzibur. So we're going to see the difference now between the Korban Tzibur and the Korban Pesach. Chamisha Devarim, this is Mishnah Dalek, Chamisha Devarim Ba'im B'tumah, Eina Nechal B'tumah. The following 5 things may be brought in a state of tumah, but most people are tummy from a corpse, but they are not eaten in a state of tumah. You can bring them, but you can't eat them. Ha'omer, the Korban Omer, on the 16th day of Nisan, with shtei halachim, and the 2 loaves that are brought on Shavuos. The lechem apanim that are placed in the shulchan every Shabbos, the zivchei sham tzibur, and the communal shlamim offerings that are brought on Shavuos, the siri rashi chadashim, and the goats that are brought as a chatas offering on Rosh Chodesh, which is coming up on Monday, which is Shabbalin Latova. Although these korbanos may be brought in tumah, they cannot be eaten. But Pesach sheba b'tumah nachal b'tumah. However, a Korban Pesach that was brought in the state of tumah may also be eaten in the state of tumah. Shalom ba mitchilaso ela lechila, because it is the only reason to bring the Korban Pesach is to be eaten. Since the main purpose of the Pesach is it's not a kapara, it's not an atonement, but it's to be eaten on the first night of Pesach. Therefore, it must be brought in tumah when most people are tummy from a corpse, it may also be eaten. Which is why technically we're supposed to bring a Korban Pesach nowadays. We don't do it because the Makom Mizbeach is. But technically speaking, it will be marked. Nitma habasa v'chelet kayim. If after a Pesach was slaughtered, its meat became tummy, but its fats and its other sacrificial parts which are burnt on the mizbeach remain tahor. Ena zergas adam. One may not throw the blood onto the mizbeach. This is Mishnah Hey. Since the main purpose of a Korban Pesach is to eat in, its blood may be thrown on the mizbeach only when that purpose can be accomplished. Therefore, when the meat is tamei, will not be able to be eaten, then its blood may not be thrown onto the altar. So you can eat a Korban Pesach when the Pesach is tahor and when the person is tamei. But if the person is tahor and the carcass is tamei, then you cannot eat that Korban Pesach. However, if the fats and other sacrificial parts become tamei, but the meat remains tahor, zargas adam, one throws the blood on the mizbeach, since the meat will be able to be eaten, then the avodah is complete. However, for all of the karbanos, the law is not the same. Rather, even if the meat became tamei and the fats and other sacrificial parts remain tahor, one throws the blood on the mizbeach. And then offers the sacrificial parts on the mizbeach while the tamei meat is burned and not eaten. Since for other offerings, eating the meat is not the offering's main purpose, the service may be done even if the meat was not be able to be eaten. Mishnah Vav. Nitma hakal o rubo, if the whole community of Jews or most of the community became tamei with tumas mace and were not able to become tar before Erev Pesach, or if the kohanim were tamei, even though the members of the tzibah were tahor, then the Korban Pesach was brought in a state of tumah. Nitma mirtakal. However, if only a minority of the community became tamei, hatahorin osin asarishan, the people who are tahor make the first Pesach. They bring their Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan. Tamein osin asasheni, and the people who are tamei make the second Pesach on Pesach Sheni. That's only Pesach Sheni is only for the Yechidim. It's not for Rov the Tzibur. Mishnah Zayin. Hapesach shenizrak dama v'achar kach nodesh v'tamei. If a Korban Pesach's blood was thrown on the mizbeach, excuse me, and then became known that the mizbeach was tamei, tzitz meratz, then the tzitz it causes it to be accepted and kosher. Why? Because the tzitz was like a crown that was worn on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, and it said Kodesh LaHashem. The Torah says that the tzitz causes certain kinds of korbanos that were brought with the wrong kavanas to find favor before Hashem. So, if you brought the korban with the wrong kavana, then the tzitz fixes that. Nitma haguf and hatzitz meratz. However, if after the blood was thrown, it became known that the owner's body had been tamei, then the tzitz does not help with that. It cannot fix that up. And because Chazal said that Nazir also Pesach regarding the offerings of a Nazir and a person who is making a Pesach, Hatzitz Meratze al Tumas Hadam, and the tzitz causes them to be accepted in a case where there's tumah on the offering's body, blood. The Ein Hatzitz Meratze al Tumas Haguf, but the tzitz does not cause them to be accepted in a case when there's tumah on the owner's body. Nitma Tumas Hatahom Hatzitz Meratze. However, if the blood was thrown If the blood was stirred, it became known that the owner had become tamei with a tumah of the depths, meaning tumah that they had that a tumah that the customer's source that no one had known about. Tumah's had to home. The system does cause the offerings to be the korbanos to be accepted. However, in this case, the halachos Moshe Messinai teaches that the korban is kosher. A little fun fact about the tzitz. So the tzitz, as he said, was worn on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. It's a Kodesh LaHashem. So what has more kedusha, the tzitz or the tefillin shalosh? Because we also wear the tefillin shalosh on the forehead. That's worn by everybody. The tzitz is only worn by the Kohen Gadol, right? So it's brought down the poskim that the tefillin shalosh have more kedusha than the tzitz. Why? Because in the tefillin shalosh you have the arba parashas of the tefillin, and you have, I think it's 21 times of the Shem Hashem, Shem Yukei Vavkei, written inside the tefillin shalosh. The tefillin has 21 Shem Yukei Vavkei, and the tzitz only has one. So therefore, the tefillin have more kedusha than the tzitz does. The question is, what is the tefillin mechaber for? The tzitz is mechaber for karbanos with the wrong karbanos. So what's the tefillin shalosh mechaber for? It's a good question, not for today's discussion. Mishnah Ches nitma shalem or rubo. If a whole Korban Pesach or most of a Korban Pesach became tamei, sarfin or shodavnei bira mi atzi hamaracha. They burn it before the bira with the wood designated for the mizbeachs, for the mizbeachs fire, to be burnt on the mizbeach. Since it likely became tamei due to the owner's negligence, he must burn it at the Beis Hamikdash, which is a public place, that he will be embarrassed and be more careful in the future. If only a smaller part of it became tamei, which is not necessarily due to negligence, similarly, any leftover meat from the Pesach that was eaten, which must be burned, and the owners may burn these anywhere in Yerushalayim, in their courts or on the roofs, with their own wood. However, the stingy people would burn even these before the bira in order to benefit from the wood of the mizbeach and not have to use their own wood. Mishnah test. Ha-Pesach sheyatza o shenitma. A Korban Pesach that was taken out of Yerushalayim and thereby became disqualified, or one that became tamei after it was slaughtered on Erev Pesach, Yisaref meyad, it should be burned immediately on Erev Pesach. Nitmu habalim o shemisu. However, if all the owners of a Pesach became tamei or died on Erev Pesach, and the Pesach is therefore disqualified because there is no one to eat it, to ubar tsuraso, its appearance must be left to change before it's burned. And that's not burned right away. However, it must be left overnight until it becomes disqualified as nosar. Yisar b'shisa asar is then burned on the 16th of Nisan, since the 15th of Nisan is Yontif, and you can't burn you cannot burn nosar on Yontif. And if the 16th is Shabbos, and it sits there for another day and is burned on the 17th. Yochanan ben Broka says, Af ze Yisari Miyad, that a Pesach whose owners died or became tamei is also burned immediately on Erev Pesach. Because it has no one to eat it. And according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, this is considered a disqualification in the actual korban, therefore it is burned right away. How this the yud. Hatzamas v'hagidin. Hatzamas v'hagidin. The bones and the sinews of the Korban Pesach that contain edible marrow. Usually you eat bone marrow. but you cannot eat them according to Pesach because you cannot break the bones. But no sir, and the leftover uneaten meat, Yisar for B'shisa Asar, they're burned on the 16th of Nisan, which is the first day of Chol and on the 15th. Chal Shis Asar Shabbos Yisar for B'shiva Asar. If the 16th falls on Shabbos, they are burned on the 17th of Nisan. The fish Einon Doch and those Shabbos, those are Yantif. Because the mitzvah to burn the leftovers is not override either Shabbos or Yantif. Okay, so now we know everyone is chayiv to eat a kazayas of meat from the Korban Pesach. So now, we're going to talk about now which parts of the animal considered to be meat. Mishnah Yiralef, anything that can be eaten in the fully grown ox whose limbs have fully matured and hardened. The achab bigdi harach is eaten in a Pesach, which is a tender lamb or kid. The Pesach can be as young as 8 days old. Much of an 8-day-old animal, much of the skeleton consists of soft cartilage, which hardens into inedible bones. So, so only the parts that are edible in an adult ox are considered edible in the Pesach. So you cannot eat those soft cartilage parts of the Pesach, because if it was a full-grown adult, you would not be eaten. You would not be eaten. They would not be eaten. The rosh shaken of five as chusim, and the cartilage on the ends of the shoulders and the other cartilages are considered edible meat in the Korban Pesach, since those of an ox can be eaten if they are cooked for a long time. Hashover es ha'etzem, Pesach HaTahor, one who breaks a bone in a Korban Pesach that is Tahor, Hareza lo karbaim, receives 40 malchus. For he's over the lav of not breaking the bone in the Korban Pesach. However, one who leaves over meat, even from a Pesach that is Tahor, the one who breaks a bone in a Pesach that is Tameh, and a Lokas Harbaim, he does not receive Malchus Harbaim, 40 lashes. Breaking the bone, the issue of breaking a bone only applies to a Pesach that's Tahor. So therefore, someone who breaks a bone in a Pesach that's Tameh, he does not get Malchus. Mr. Yabez, Aver Shiyatsu Mixas, if a part of a limb from a Pesach orphan is taken out of Yerushalayim, that's a problem. Chosech Ad Shemakil Etzim, he should cut into the meat all around the limb at the place where the disqualified meat begins until he reaches the bone. The Perek, and he should then peel the meat that is still valid off of the bone until he reaches the joint where the bone connects to the next bone, and then cut through the joint to separate the bones. The meat that was taken out, the meat that was not taken outside, which he has peeled off the bone, is eaten. The meat that was taken outside Yerushalayim is burnt. With regard to other karbanos, if part of a limb was taken outside the mutter area, he cuts through the bone with a cleaver to remove the disqualified part. Because there is no isser about breaking a bone in any of the karbanos beside the Korban Pesach. Inward of the doorway of the city gates is considered inside Yerushalayim. And outward of the doorway is considered outside Yerushalayim. The windows and the walls and the thickness of the actual walls are considered inside Yerushalayim, and the Pesach may therefore be eaten in a window or on top of the city wall. If you're walking through Shar Yafo or Shar Ashba or Shar Shechem, and you're inside the entranceway, then that sounds like it's inside Yerushalayim. If you're outside it, if you're like you have to be careful over there. I mean, when it's not Nogea right now, but it could be. When we get the psak from the poskim, that we can bring a Korban Pesach this year in the on Erev Pesach, then we can revisit this conversation. So what's the limit to where you can bring it up? But right now, we're not talking about that. Mishnah Yigimel. Shtei Chavruah Shayu Ochlos Advice Echad. This is the last Mishnah for today. Shtei Chavruah Shayu Ochlos Advice Echad. If two groups are eating a single Pesach in one house. Elu Hofchin Es Penehem Helach Ochlin. Then these people in one group may turn their faces in one direction and eat. Elu Hofchin Es Penehem Helach Ochlin. These people, the other group, can turn their faces in another direction and eat. Although this makes it clear that they're two separate groups, it is no concern because the Pesach may be eaten in more than one group. And for the same reason, the kettle of water that is used to dilute the wine may be placed even in the middle between the two groups, even though it separates them. However, when the waiter who is sitting and eating with one of the groups stands to pour wine for the people in the other group, he must close his mouth and turn his face toward his own group until he reaches his own group, and then he may eat. Since a single person may not eat the Pesach with more than one group, the waiter who eats with one of the groups but serves both of them must be careful to keep his mouth closed and to face his own group when he is serving the group that he is not eating with, so that he is not suspected of eating with that group as well. And the bride who is embarrassed to eat in front of people may turn her face away from her group and eat, even though by doing so it is as though she is eating apart from the group with which she is sitting. This too is permitted because the Korban Pesach may be eaten by more than one group, as we have said. Thank you for joining us. We will continue with Mr. Shem on Sunday with Perek Ches. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and sending you Shabbos greetings from Yerushalayim Kodesh. Kol Tov.